네, 그럼 저희 바로 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 안녕하십니까. 2018 인공지능 국제 컨퍼런스 오늘 오후 세션을 맡아서 함께하게 된 신재입니다. 반갑습니다. 네, 오후에는 저희가 패널 토론 이후에 이곳 백두홀 그리고 3층 한라홀에서 각각 동시에 세션이 진행될 예정인데요. 안내된 프로그램을 참고하셔서 원하시는 세션에 참석하시면 되겠습니다. 그럼 바로 오늘 패널 토론에 대해서 설명을 드리겠습니다. Spotting the challenges and opportunities of the AI era. 인공지능 세대에 있어서 어떠한 도전 과제들이 있고 기회는 어떤 것인지 대해서 오늘 알아보도록 할 텐데요. 좌장으로는 서울대학교 고학수 교수님께서 수고해 주시겠고, 앞서 오전에 식전 강연 그리고 기조 강연을 함께 해주셨던 세 분의 연사분들과 또 오후 강연자이신 오렌 크라우스 페노믹 AI 대표님께서 함께 해주시도록 하겠습니다. 그럼 저는 고 교수님께 마이크를 넘겨드리도록 하겠습니다. 부탁드립니다.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start the panel session. As introduced, I'm Hak-suk. I teach at Seoul National University, and we have these four distinguished speakers for the panel, three of whom already spoke in the morning, and one additional member. Let me briefly reintroduce these members. Sitting right next to me is Terry Sejnowski, professor at UC San Diego, and now everyone obviously is an expert in AI. His specialty is computational neuroscience. And then sitting next to Terry is Bill Daly, CTO at NVIDIA, and also he's still maintaining his professor position at Stanford University. And next to him, Mr. Cheow. Chen is his family name, I was just told. He works for the Singaporean government. He's the government chief digital technology officer. And sitting next to him, Dr. Oren Kraus. He is an expert in bioinformatics, and he co-founded a company called Phenomic AI. For this session, we have about 50 minutes. We try to finish at 2:45. And for the panel discussion, three of the panel members already spoke in the morning, so I'll give an opportunity to speak first for Dr. Oren Kraus. I'll give 10 minutes for him, and for the rest, three panel members, 5 minutes each to either summarize what was told in the morning or to elaborate on what transpired during the morning session or during lunch talk. And then we'll have about 25 to 30 minutes for open discussions. So in the audience, if you have questions, please let us know the first 20 minutes or so. We will try to address the questions if you have any. If there are, too many, we'll have to make some selections. But in any event, we'll try to entertain as many questions as possible. So with that introduction, I'll let Oren speak. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So first of all, I'd like to say it's an honor to be on this panel, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So my story is that I finished my PhD about a year ago with a professor called Brendan Frey at the University of Toronto. So he's very well known in the field of applying machine learning to biology and to genetics. He himself worked with Jeff Hinton during his PhD and really pioneered part of the early work in deep learning. During my PhD, he started his company called Deep Genomics, which is doing very well in understanding how mutations in genetic code relate to disease and how they can develop new therapeutics to overcome those challenges. Inspired by him, I set out to start my own company based on the research I was doing at the University of Toronto. So that company focuses on applying computer vision and machine learning to understanding how drugs affect cells in experiments. And the idea is that with the improved performance of of deep learning models, we can actually discover better drugs and cure diseases a lot faster. Another part of the reason I'm here today is to talk about the ecosystem in Toronto, specifically the AI research happening there, and also the different organizations supporting startups, and also the larger corporations that are investing in Toronto. So I'm happy to take any questions related to that. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Do you want to spend a few minutes to, talk about AI, your work on AI or AI in Canada, or bioinformatics in machine learning?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I can chat more about that. So in the space of AI applied to drug discovery and healthcare, Toronto is really leading that space. So in addition to the company I started, there's a company called Atomwise, which is also doing very well at predicting how predicting in silico which drugs are going to bind to which targets, and they have collaborations with some major pharma companies. There's the Brendan Fry's company, Deep Genomics, which is developing new therapeutics for genetic diseases. And it's, that really kind of comes from the fact that there's great researchers on the bioinformatics and systems biology side in Toronto, as well as fundamental research in machine learning. So those communities ended up interacting quite a bit in the past decade, and that's kind of launched a lot of these companies and a lot of these innovations. In terms of what's happening more generally in Toronto, in the last year they launched the Vector Institute. And they've grown the faculty members there quite a bit. So they've recruited at least 10 new professors there. And they're really growing the amount of researchers they can train. So they've accepted lots of new students as well. They've received a lot of funding from the government as well as from leading tech organizations. And similarly in Montreal, they've established a Mila Institute. So that's been around for a while, but it recently got much more funding from the government. And there's also an institute in Alberta called Amy. That one's more focused on reinforcement learning and led by Rich Sutton.
Okay. Then now we'll take turns to spend 5 minutes each. Perhaps start from Terry, then Bill, and Jen.
Well, you've already heard me, and
maybe some of the audience members may
maybe not
have been.
Okay, well, the title of my talk was The Deep Learning Revolution, and it really is a revolution in the sense that it is affecting so many different industries, individuals, and we're just at the very beginning of this transformation that big data is making available to these learning algorithms, which can extract from the data solutions to very difficult problems, difficult for humans. And it's going to have a transformative impact on everybody's lives. Now, unfortunately, we really can't predict what those impacts are today because we really don't know what areas this new technology is going to create opportunities that don't exist, jobs that don't exist right now, but will in the future as it penetrates into the general use. But one of the things that I think is particularly relevant for Korea is the fact that the mantra is that whoever has more data wins. That is to say, if you don't have the data, especially labeled data, which is very expensive, then it's very difficult to really extract from that today things that are of value to companies, drug companies, or to self-driving cars, or from any of the number of applications that you're going to be hearing about. But I think that there is another route that really, something that Korea can make an enormous contribution to, and that has to do with what was called unsupervised learning algorithms. And so you saw an example of that in the generative adversarial networks. That is to say, you don't need labeled data, you just have to have a lot of examples. And you will then be able to generate new data. And in that way, you can generate infinite amount of data. And so in effect, what you could do is use a GAN to jumpstart yourself. You can create your own labeled data. So I think you need to be a little creative here and try to focus in areas that aren't being exploited right now by the places like U.S. Silicon Valley, or China is gearing up, making huge investments. And I think that your technology industry here is a very viable and can meet the challenge. And I mentioned in my talk, I really think that what's important is not simply taking what we have and applying it, although that will make a lot of money for a lot of people, but it's making the opportunities for younger people, the next generation, to have the new ideas, to be creative, because there's so many other directions, and we're at a very early stage now, and almost every year at NIPS, there's a bombshell where somebody comes in, typically a graduate student or postdoc. I remember when Ian Goodfellow first came, and developed the first GANs. I mean, this was a revelation to me. It was really spawned a whole new industry within AI. So this is something that I think this country really has an important contribution to make through the creative input from all of the young engineers, all of the young machine learning experts, hardware companies that are out here right now. That's, I think, a direction that could be exploited.
Okay, good. Bill?
Yeah, so I guess this panel was titled Challenges and Opportunities for AI. So I wrote down a couple of what I thought are the challenges and opportunities. Let me start with opportunities. I think, as Terry and others have said, we're really just at the tip of the iceberg of applications of AI. And the real opportunities are how we can apply AI to every walk of our lives, how we work, how we play, how we live, our medicine, our education, to make our lives better. I think we're already seeing how we can have smart homes. As an environmentalist, I'm very encouraged by applications where you can have cameras around a house that turn on lights, not only when there's just a person there, but when the person is looking in an area. So there's no point illuminating an area that nobody is looking at. It can moderate the heat, so you only heat where people are and not parts of the house or parts of the time of day when nobody is there. We can have smart factories that are more intelligent in how they do inspections, how they do assembly, how they plan for supply chain. We've heard many things about smart cars, and NVIDIA is something we're very concerned about because many people die each year on the highways, and we feel that can be reduced to a small fraction of what it is today. In medicine, it can interpret images, it can interpret gene expressions of disease. It can mine medical data to find what patterns lead to certain diagnoses and assist physicians. To me, one of the big applications in medicine is to have a personal health coach that's always with you. And when you're looking at eating that scoop of ice cream, it suggests that maybe you should have a salad instead. Or it's keeping track of how much salt you've consumed today, or various things to try to basically help you manage your health on a day-to-day basis rather than only intervening when a disease occurs. And having been a professor for 30 years, I'm very excited about the applications of AI to education. I've observed how every student learns differently, and how with AI we have the potential to build a personal tutor for every student that understands both how to motivate them by couching the examples in terms that they're excited about. If they're like dinosaurs, every example is about dinosaurs, but also to understand how they learn and to figure out where they get stuck and how to basically insert the intermediate concepts so they get across the difficult problems in a way that's personal to them. It's not one size fits all. It's education fit to the individual. And so I think that there's many opportunities to have AI come into every aspect of our lives and make our lives better. Now, I know many people feel threatened by this, that they feel that AI is going to replace people and take jobs away, but I see it completely differently. In the case of an educator, for example, I would think having AI tutors for all of my students makes me a more effective educator. And in fact, this is, I think, a common theme. Having AI assist a doctor in making diagnoses makes a doctor a better doctor. It doesn't replace the doctor, it empowers the doctor. And in general, in every application of AI, what AI does is it gives us all assistance, it empowers us, and allows us to operate at a higher level while the AI does things that we could do ourselves, but we'd rather work at this higher level and delegate that part of the job to the AI. So I think the opportunities are enormous, and our life is going to get enormously better because of AI. It's also going to free up a lot more time for people to pursue art and science rather than do a lot of the tasks that people are doing today. Those can be done by AI. Now, on the challenges side, I see three principal challenges to the AI revolution, and it's hardware, data, and people. And in my talk, I talked a lot about the hardware because I'm in a business that makes the hardware that fuels a lot of the AI revolution. And as I said, the revolution was enabled by hardware. The algorithms have been around for 30 years, and it's being gated by hardware. And so the challenge we're facing is that without Moore's law helping us anymore, how do we continue to improve the performance and performance per watt of hardware for AI training and inference, and particularly in the Internet of Things, where it's embedded in applications where we have very limited power. How do we really accomplish the most with the least amount of energy? And we really need to push the limits here. Today, our NVIDIA Deep Learning Accelerator, the NVDLA, has a figure of merit of 200 femtojoules per Mac. I'm confident that we can do 70, and I think with research we should be able to push well under 50, maybe even get to 10 femtojoules per Mac. And by pushing that figure of merit down, we will enable enormously more AI applications, and particularly in challenging environments. The next big challenge is data. As Terry said, whoever has the most data wins, but data is expensive, and labeled data is doubly expensive. It's a huge task to take a data set and annotate it, put little boxes around every person, every car, and label them with what they are. It's hugely expensive. And so I think a big challenge for the community is to figure out how to do more with less data. I've initiated a few projects with NVIDIA recently on zero-shot and low-shot learning, and these are cases where you observe that to train ImageNet to recognize a cat or a dog, you need 1,000 labeled images of cats or dogs. But if you want to tell a child to recognize a zebra, you simply tell them that it's a horse with stripes. And with 0 shots of observing zebras, the child will recognize the first zebra they see successfully. And we should be able to do similar things with AI by using multimodalities, by combining images with textual descriptions so that the AI can learn to interpret not just that this set of pixels is a cat, but understand why it's a cat. It has whiskers, it has ears like this, and then be able to recognize those features to recognize other things with fewer labeled examples. We can also do a lot of semi-supervised learning, so that once we've learned what is a car, what is a bicycle, what is a pedestrian, our networks can recognize the obvious cars, bicycles, and pedestrians without any human assistance, and only ask the human labelers to handle the difficult cases that they haven't yet figured out how to do. So through a combination of low-shot learning, semi-supervised learning, I think we can overcome the data challenge and allow people without huge labeled data sets to be able to enable new applications, because otherwise a barrier to each new application will be collecting, curating, and labeling that data set. And ultimately then I think that the limiting factor in achieving more applications and making our lives better through AI is people. Right now, the number of people who are trained practitioners in AI is very small. There's huge competition for these people, and we really need to increase the set of people who are able to do this through education to enable the future. At NVIDIA, we're doing this through something we call our Deep Learning Institutes, where we teach courses all over the world. We've actually, somebody probably has the number. We've run many tens of thousands of people through these courses to date. But I think that there's a real call to the education community to set up courses, to set up programs, and take people and train them to be AI experts, data scientists, to help wrangle the data sets we need to help build the models, train the models, and basically build the applications that will make life better through AI.
Good. Cheow.
Yeah, I think Bill has said everything I need to say, basically. But I echo the speakers quite a fair bit that this is really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that can be done. And I think one of the challenges right now is people, governments, private sector, etc., struggling to figure out what makes sense now, not 10 years down the road. I think that's really one of the challenges. How do you ensure that you invest in the right areas to invest in AI? And it's not an easy task because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of myth, which I think needs to be debunked, and then settle on something that's practical and can be implemented. I mean, that's probably one of the challenges that many countries face, including ourselves. The other thing that we spoke quite a fair bit, I think every speaker spoke about, was data. Creating a data infrastructure that allows better use of data, as you say, labeling of data, discoverability of data. These things are difficult to do, and it's not something you do overnight. The nature of most countries today is that data is fragmented. It's very badly fragmented and low-quality data. So in Singapore, I think one of our key priorities is really to how do we create the right data infrastructure, and a lot of work is being done on that. Now, the next thing is, I spoke quite a fair bit this morning about it, it's platforms, right? You can't do everything yourself, that's the reality. I think we learned that from day one. So how do you leverage a lot of good work that's done across the globe? It's not just within the country, it's really across the globe. Working in big companies, small companies, startups, I think everyone has a role to play in that. And the more we are able to do that, I think the more creative we can become. And I think the last two things is, the concept of use case is very, very important. We need to know what problem we're trying to solve. Most of the time, people charge into AI by just saying that I want to do something in AI because it's so great, it's so important. But I think that's a wrong approach. You really need to figure out what problem you're trying to solve, look for the right technology, look for the right people, look for the right data, and then you'll probably get a better chance of success. So I think that's quite important as a summary. And then the last part is, as you mentioned, talent. Talent is everything. There's a global war for talent. Everybody wants the best AI scientists. There are not many around this world. And China and US probably has most of them. And why would you go anywhere else, right? Because at the end, there is a center of gravity in all these things. Putting 3 AI scientists in one country is not going to solve a problem. Having a critical mass is important. So how do you ensure that you get the right centers to be built and with the right people in it? So that's my summary.
Oren, do you want to add, or?
Yeah, sure, I can add to what the speaker said. So, like specifically in the drug discovery and medical space, there's challenges where you can't even annotate the data because we don't know how to interpret it. So I think unsupervised learning is going to have a big impact there. So we can actually start making sense of things that are, we're not really capable of understanding yet, but we can really make a lot of discoveries that way.
Okay, good. We heard a lot about hurdles and opportunities at the same time. I would challenge further and raise the same question to everyone, which is, among the hurdles, if you have to choose one, say lack of data, lack of trained people, sometimes laws or regulations, in particular related to privacy, or hardware, computational facilities, and lack of data, whatever. If you have choose one challenge, or in mathematical terms, binding constraint, what would that be?
If I had to pick one, it would be lack of data. I've seen more applications that are hindered by lack of data than any of the other. I think all the other limiting factors and challenges are important, but I think lack of data is the sort of universal big constraint. When somebody says, well, I've got a great idea to use AI for this application, then they find I need how many labeled examples, and pretty soon they're less enthusiastic.
So there's another lack that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think it is really ultimately going to hold us back, which is lack of imagination. And let me give you an example. The first color television was built by an engineer at RCA, Radio Corporation of America. I don't even know if it exists anymore. But a reporter asked him, could you tell us what your invention is going to be used for? And he said, well, this is going to revolutionize the telephone. And it was because that was the technology of the day, and he thought that it would be used for the telephone. Of course, it was used to create a whole new industry, a television industry, and then an advertising industry. And no one foresaw that. No one could imagine that. And just to give you another example, in 1990, when the internet went public, it was being used by academics for sending the data and papers back and forth. But could anybody there have imagined what influence the internet now has on every aspect of our daily life, and has revolutionized all commercial industries? It's revolutionized the music industry, it's revolutionized the movie industry, it's revolutionized social media, it's changed politics. You know, these are things that no one imagined. And that ultimately is why we can't predict the future, is that there's going to be these unimagined applications that are going to be the most important ones. So, but we just have to grow into them.
Okay. Would you?
Yeah, I mean, since we are going on to the lack of data, lack of imagination, I think one of the challenge I find, especially in the public sector, is in some ways the lack of courage to actually change. You know, when we talk about AI, we talk about digitalization, there is a need to fundamentally change the operating model. And that's scary. It's scary for everyone. I mean, and at worst, it's public sector, right? Because people are still unused to massive transformational changes. They talk about transformational changes, but the reality is that what we're changing is just iterations of a current model. Are we able to disrupt the model totally and say that throw everything out and start from scratch? Very few people will be willing to do that because the inherent problems it's going to cause, whether it's dislocation of people, dislocation of jobs, etc., it's not small. And to me, I think we have seen changes, but fundamental changes are hard to come by.
Yeah, I'll follow that more with a technical note. So, you know, because just the way AI applications work is so different than traditional applications. Like a lot of startups and like even big companies like struggle to actually figure out how to implement and deploy some of these technologies. So you really need to figure out how to manage the data well, and the data can look very different from different inputs. You know, if it's something that's online, and also like a lot of younger talent only wants to do machine learning research. So like when we're trying to recruit people, it's actually hard to find like traditional software developers. So that's another smaller challenge, but it's still there.
Okay. We have about 23 minutes left. I think we can have some time for Q&A from the audience. Do we have a question sheet, or do we go on live and? Yeah, maybe we can get questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. And there's one gentleman over there.
Don't be shy.
조금 좀 그 다른 각도의 질문을 하나 드리고 싶은데, 예전에도 AI에 대한 부분이 많이 붐이 났다가 사라지고 또 붐이 났다 사라지고 하는 과정이 여러 번 있었잖아요. 최근에 몇 년 사이에 이제 그 뭐 딥러닝 기술에 따라서 뭐 이런저런 붐이 많이 일어나면서 뭐 구글이나 애플이나 뭐 페이스북이나 여러 데가 투자를 많이 하고 있는데, 이런 것이 혹시 예전과 같이 이게 버블이 돼서 실질적으로 킬링 유스 케이스도 나오지 못하고 데이터 부족으로 사라져갈 다시 한번 침체기 맞을 수 있는 가능성은 없는지, 요즘 보면 그런 생각을 종종 하거든요. 예를 들어서 미국에서 IBM의 왓슨 프로젝트 가지고 이 병원에 적용을 했다가 막상 써보니까 별로 좋지 않더라라고 하는 그 느낌이 나서 도로 뭐 이렇게 사라져 간다는 얘기도 나오는 것 같고, 또 그런 옆에 들은 적도 있고, 그런 거 보면 좀 이렇게 단편적인 부분은 나오지만 적용에 대한 것이 그 투자에 대한 효과가 없다 그러면 좀 이렇게 사라져갈 수 있는 그런 가능성에 대한 부분은 없는지, 그런 부분 어떻게 생각하시는지 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Let me take a...
Yeah, Terry and Bill
Yeah.
have been in this field for such a long period.
Yeah, so there have been three sort of surges of excitement about AI. The first one was really around the perceptrons in the 1960s, which Minsky and Peppert put to death with their book with that title. The second, I was actually a member of the MIT AI lab at the time in the 80s. And this was when the Japanese ran their fifth generation computing project. Ed Feigenbaum was building his large medical expert systems, and it was really a push in AI around rule-based systems, where you basically would describe, very rigid logical reasoning chains to solve certain problems. And the reason why those first two AI surges failed is that they didn't deliver the goods. When people actually applied them to real problems, they didn't work. There was a gap. People had grand visions. Doug Lennett was going to create this AI called Psych, where he would basically transcribe all of the world's knowledge into logical expressions, and then it would become conscious, and it didn't work.
Common sense.
Yeah. And what's really different about this time, and what's really exciting to me, having been watching the surge and the crash in the 80s, and it was a big crash when it crashed, is that this time it's delivering the goods. I can point to many customers of NVIDIA that are basically generating revenue, they're making processes more efficient, they're improving their businesses by applying AI in ways that is measurable, and because it's delivering the goods, they're basically buying more systems, developing new applications, and pushing it forward. What causes an AI winter or any technology winter is when things are overpromised and underdeliver. And I think that in this case, there have been a lot of big promises made, but it's really delivering. I mean, there's great examples here. I mean, speech recognition is amazingly better today than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and that's because of deep learning. And people have turned that into all sorts of good systems. The chatbot example from the Singapore government is a great one, but actually many customer service portals are now chatbots, and you don't realize you're talking to a chatbot. And only when your problems get really difficult do you actually get flaunted off to the human to handle that. It saves these companies enormous amounts of money. Every time you upload an image to Facebook, it's run by many neural networks. The most important ones are the ones that check for objectionable content and copyrighted content. And if they didn't have these neural networks, they would have to have armies of people doing these searches, but the networks actually do it very effectively. So there's just thousands of applications where it's delivering the goods, and because of that, I don't see a winter coming. It's living up to the expectations, not failing them.
So to follow up, and I could also list a number of big wins. Google, for example, decreased the cost of their data centers. Google has these big arrays of cores sitting all around the world that is answering, within milliseconds your queries. A tremendous amount of power goes into that, and using AI, they're able to load balance and reduce the cost by 15%. 15% of a big number, hundreds of millions and $1 billion, it really adds up. And they wouldn't be doing it if they weren't able to make money on it. There's no doubt that this is happening, and if that's all it is, it's still a big win. But I think there's something even more important going on here. And Bill mentioned this in his talk, which was that we had these algorithms in the 80s, but until we could scale them up, we didn't know how well they would do on real-world problems. And it was only when we reached a threshold that occurred in 2012 or 13 that we were able to even approach that speech recognition and object recognition in images. And we didn't know until we actually got to that point whether or not these algorithms would scale. And in computer science, the most important thing about an algorithm is how well it scales, because it might solve a small problem very efficiently, but if you increase the problem by 1 million, a lot of these algorithms crash and burn, and that was the case for a lot of the early AI algorithms. They didn't scale. So here we have, for the first time in AI, an algorithm that scales. As you get a bigger network, the performance gets better. As you have more data, the performance gets better. And by the way, nature was there first, because you probably know that we have a cerebral cortex which is much bigger for our body weight than any other primate, and more was better. So nature figured out how to develop an architecture that scaled, where you could add more capabilities by having more cortex. Same learning algorithms, just applied to different types of input data, whether it be sports or physics or math. That's really the big advance. Now, it may be that we still need a lot more computer power, and here's my calculation. If you take the biggest deep learning network today, which, as you saw, had hundreds of layers, 1 million units, 1 billion connections, you could fit that network into a cubic millimeter of cortex, about a size of a rice grain. So right now, we are powering all these applications with things that biology is almost like, you know, a tiny, tiny little piece of what you do, what your cortex does. And you have hundreds of thousands, millions of these deep learning networks running in parallel. And so we have a long way to go in terms of increasing the computer power. And then maybe there's another threshold. I don't know how long it'll take us. Maybe it'll take us a decade, 2 decades, or 3 decades. But there may be another threshold where suddenly there's another quantum leap. But on the way, there'll be incremental advances. And as those advances are made, more and more applications will become solvable. So, you know, I think we're on a very good trajectory. I think that unlike these previous winters, I think that we're in the spring. This is springtime. Finally, the sun is out. It's still a little cool, but you know, with the progression towards summer, I think that the flowers will start popping out, and this is going to take time. You have to be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. But we see the road ahead. We see where to go and where there's going to be low-hanging fruit that's already being exploited. But there are other bigger problems that really need to be solved too. And we need to be looking at those. And I think education is exactly the right one, because this is going to empower every human being, is to be able to have a personal tutor. It's been shown, and this has been proven by psychologists, that the best way to learn something is to have a human interacting with a child, a human that knows the child and can debug the kid if they have problems with some concept. But that's extremely labor intensive, and you can't afford that unless, you know, you're very wealthy. But if we could do that through AI, then every child could have a personal tutor. And this would be the optimal form of education. It won't replace the teacher, but it will help the teacher be able to reach all the children. Right now, if you go to your classroom in the US, a teacher standing up there, and you have a class of 30 or 40 children, there are some who are really struggling, and there are some that are way ahead. And how can the teacher possibly reach all those children? You can't. You can go for the mean, but you're leaving off the tails. And so with personal education, that is going to be solved. And I completely believe that. I'm committed to this, and I've been really moving some of my research in that direction.
Okay. Oren, in the question, there is a reference to Watson from college. So as a specialist in bioinformatics, would you have some comment? Or?
Yeah, I think in the pharma space, they've seen something similar with promise around like AI and chemistry, also around the 80s and 90s. So, you know, a lot of the people I interact with have been around in industry since then, so they're skeptical even when you talk about what you can do these days. Yeah, but I think it's really the fact that we can actually deliver results these days, and then there's still a lot of skepticism because of all the hype. So, you know, Watson, I think, had a bit too much of a marketing campaign, right? So as a young company in the space, you really have to validate very effectively, you know, either with academics or early partners that you can get on board. So you really want to prove that you can do something before you promise that you can do it. And I think that if people keep working that way, they'll prevent any other AI winter. But yeah, I think another idea is also that you know, it's kind of generally accepted now that if you have enough data and, you know, a good data science team, you can really solve any challenge. So the shift has gone from what kind of algorithms you can develop to what kind of data you have. So I think really being innovative on using less data or innovative way to collect and label data is going to be more important going forward.
Okay. Now I have a question sheet. I'll pick the first one, which is, I guess many of the audience members are from the industry, so perhaps the question is from somebody from the industry, I guess. It's about industrial applicability. So the question is, what's the area or field which is growing the fastest right now, or which deserves attention in the near future? Would anyone have comment?
Well, it's hard to pick one area that's growing faster because there's so many areas growing simultaneously. You I think when I look at various NVIDIA customers, I see various applications in medicine sort of standing out because it's an area where there's some immediate applications. If you have image data, you can diagnose skin lesions better than dermatologists. You can look at mammograms and detect breast cancer better than trained oncologists. Lots of applications, particularly in medical imaging, that I think, to me, stand out as enormous progress. But I also see people applying it in industrial inspection, in robotic warehouses, where AI allows them to run warehouses where the humans just sit in one place, and little robots run out and get shelves of goods and bring them to the humans that then pick the things off the shelves and throw them in boxes, and it reduces human labor by having trained these robots to basically be autonomous enough to travel the warehouse so that people don't have to. There's just so many applications, it's hard to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill mentioned one in his talk, which is not generally known because probably many of you don't read the physics literature or the chemistry or the cosmology literature, which is that deep learning has already transformed science in a way that has, in my lifetime, I would have never imagined. So as you know, scientists are collecting big data at the same pace, in fact, maybe faster, than commercial companies. The Large Hadron Collider collects petabytes of data from particles streaming off from their collider every day. And we were talking at lunch, and they can't possibly save all the data. So they have to do a very quick triage to figure out which of the collisions are the most likely to lead to a new particle. And so if they could improve that, even by a small margin, they can vastly improve the rate at which they collect data. And that's been happening now, and not just in physics. In biology, super resolution microscopy has been improved by factors of 1,000 because of the fact that you can train a network, a deep learning network, to take a grainy image and then refine it, denoise it, to the point where it is nanometer level of resolution. So this is real. I mean, this is something that scientists, of course, they're not going to be adopting anything that is going to be wasted time and effort. No, it's really a tool that scientists who collect lots of data and have to improve the performance to answer the questions. They're running with it, and these are people who actually are very well trained in math and computer programming. So there's no barrier there. They just basically take it and they run with it. So I think that's like the harbinger. That's giving you a sense for the power. If hard-nosed scientists say yes, this is important for answering my questions, then I go with it. Now, someone had an interesting point to make about questions. By far, the most important thing that you can give your graduate student is a good question. And they're very hard to find, they're very hard to predict. My thesis advisor, John Hopfield, at Princeton, told me that to get a PhD, you have to solve a problem, and that's your thesis. But if you're a good physicist, you should be able to solve any problem. If you want to be a great physicist, you have to know what problem to solve. Mm-hmm. Because most problems are, they're dead ends in terms of, implications. But if you pick a really good problem, then this will continue to blossom and to impact many other fields. And when that happens, you win a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I'd like to take a different spin on that, because I think one of the challenges is not about what field is growing the fastest. It's about the ability and the need that things are coalescing. You never solve a problem today with just one field. It doesn't work that way. So the beauty of big data, the beauty of AI is that it's able to integrate many fields of learning together to actually solve a problem in a totally different way that we have done it years ago. And I think that's the beauty of AI and data science, right? You don't have to be an expert in one area to be just the only expert that will solve the problem. I think that is really something that has totally changed the game, totally, versus the past, whereby if you're a physicist, you're a doctor, you're a transport engineer, you don't need to be like that. In fact, you need everybody to help you solve the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the fields that are moving slower are mostly affected by regulations and how difficult it is to work with the data in those fields. So I think some other technologies that help protect privacy are going to impact and help those fields move along faster.
Okay. Oren just mentioned privacy, but I think we only have a few minutes left, so there are, I know there are a lot of people with a lot of questions, but well, I'll just have the very last question, I'm sorry. I will read, the question is in English, so what is the best way to protect abuse of AI? So perhaps everywhere you go, you will encounter this type of question, I assume. So maybe 1 minute each.
I think it's terrible that anyone would abuse it. They should be sent to jail. No. This is, every technology has potential for abuse as well as good. And so it's really up to us to decide how to use it. And that may require rules and regulations, but you want to avoid doing that prematurely until you understand what the real impact is. We're beginning to understand that with Facebook and some other companies, abuse of data. And so in due time, that will be corrected. But it takes time to uncover the potential for abuse, and then to adopt the proper regulations that you don't go overboard. You don't want to go overboard because you're going to basically suppress an industry. But you want to make sure that that there are rules that everybody has to follow. Otherwise, you may actually end up doing something that Google claims it would never do. Do no evil.
Well, I think probably the best way to avoid abuse is to make sure people are aware of what the technology can do. Because I think a lot of abuse stems from people using AI to do things people didn't think were previously possible. So our work on being able to synthesize high-resolution images, and by the way, we can do that with videos as well, allows us to make what look like legitimate photographs and videos of things that never happened. So I could make a video of Terry robbing a bank, right? And then say, well, here's Terry robbing the bank, and he'd be arrested and thrown in jail. But if people are aware of what the technology can do, then I think that they'll be, skeptical enough that they'll, require more corroboration of things. You'll have less fake news. Another real concern about abuse of AI has to do with bias. A lot of AIs are biased about gender, about race, in ways that reflects data sets. And I think that when people curate data sets, they need to be aware of this and be very conscious to avoid unconscious bias in training AIs from data sets that will draw biased conclusions about things. I think we also have to be very careful when we put AI into safety-critical systems, that we have sufficient safeguards to avoid failures that could result in tragic accidents. And I think that there's a whole set of things we need to be aware of there. But I think awareness is the way that we combat these problems. We don't combat it by shutting down AI. We combat it by embracing AI, but being aware of its capabilities and understanding where the issues are so that we can address them one by one.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I think awareness is important. But the thing that scares me the most, like any technology, it can be used for good or bad. That's life, and we got to live with that. But the thing that scares me most about AI, as well as many of these new technologies that's coming up, is that there are many unintended consequences. A lot of times when we're doing something, we don't think far enough, or we don't anticipate far enough that these things have very larger consequences. When Facebook was started, I don't think they were aware that fake news will become one of the things that's going to kill them, right? Or the fact that using those information for political means is going to kill them. Those consequences, I don't think anyone predicted, even as early as like 2 or 3 years ago. We're not talking about 10 years ago, right? So with AI, the consequences are just going to get more and more unpredictable. We may not know what the implications are. And the earlier we know that, the better we can deal with it. The problem is that it only reaches a point where it blows up, and then we start dealing with it, and that's kind of too late. And then, to me, that's the biggest fear, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think, in addition to what the other speaker said, if you think about the technical side, it's a lot more exciting to report successes of machine learning and less exciting to research vulnerabilities. So luckily, there's like a small set of researchers that are going that direction in the machine learning community. But I think we really needed to understand the limitations of some of these technologies before we start deploying them on a massive scale.
So one last footnote. The NIPS meeting is coming up in Montreal in the first week of December, so next week. And this is a huge issue at the meeting. And so we have speakers, we have panel discussions, and it's also about inclusiveness and diversity is also very important in our community. So if the community of researchers is aware of the potential for abuse, we are the ones who are creating the technology. We are the ones who will understand potential problems first, and we also are in a position to be able to correct that if we think that there's a way to prevent that from happening within the algorithm. For example, bias is a good example. Well, if your goal, if your cost function just says make as much money as possible, then it will use whatever bias it can to create that. For example, people who live in bad neighborhoods won't get money because there's a high percentage of those people who don't pay their mortgage. But if you think that being fair is important, then that should be part of the cost function. In other words, fairness has some value. And now the question is, how do you weigh that against profit? And now that's something that goes beyond what the technologists can tell you, and we need input now from other people in society.
Okay, good. Well, we ran out of time. I wish we had much more time. I personally have a lot of follow-up questions to ask, but I assume all audience members too. But just because we don't have enough time, we'll have to stop here. And the last question we entertained was the one that everyone in our society will have to think whenever we do machine learning and other AI technologies. So with that, we'll finish the session. Thank you, every panel member and all the audience members to join the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, our moderator, as well as the four panelists for being with us as for the panel discussion. 네, 다시 한번 수고해주신 5분께 큰 박수 부탁드리며 저희 패널 디스커션 이걸로 종료하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 그럼 저희 무대가 정리되는 대로 바로 다음 세션 진행하도록 할 텐데요. 다음 세션부터는 저희가 두 세션이 동시에 진행이 될 것입니다. 이곳 5층 백두홀에서는 AI 기술 전개 방향에 대해서 알아보도록 하겠고요. 3층 한라홀에서는 국가별 AI 정책에 대해서 알아보도록 하겠습니다. 관심 있는 세션 주제로 지금 이동하셔서 참석해 주시면 되겠습니다. 무대가 정리되는 대로 저희 AI 기술 전개 방향 첫 번째 강연 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 통역 리시버에 대해서도 다시 한번 이제 안내 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 이곳 백두홀에서는 저희가 한국어는 1번 그리고 영어는 2번으로 진행이 되고요. 3층 한라홀에서는 한국어는 3번 그리고 영어는 4번으로 함께해 주시기 바랍니다. 더불어서 저희가 오늘 모든 세션이 종료 후에 저희가 경품 추첨이 마련이 되어 있습니다. 저희가 총 6분께 이 경품을 드릴 텐데요. 무엇인지 궁금하시죠? 네, 끝까지 함께 하셔서 경품이 무엇인지도 확인을 하시고 또 그 행운의 주인공이 되시길 바랍니다. 아직 혹시 등록 데스크에 비치된 경품 안에 명함을 넣지 않으신 분들께서는 지금 이 시간을 활용하셔서 넣으셔도 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 저희 금일 모든 세션이 종료된 후에 참석해 주신 모든 분들께 감사한 마음을 담아서 경품 추첨 시간 마련한 관계로 그때 함께 해주시고 또 경품이 무엇인지도 확인해 보시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 그러면 다시 또 안내를 드리면 이곳 5층 백두홀에서는 AI 기술 전개 방향 대해서 알아보겠고요. 3층 한라홀에서는 국가별 AI 정책이라는 주제 아래로 프랑스, 중국, 일본, 캐나다 등 각국 인공지능 관련된 정책 알아보도록 하겠습니다. 관련 정책뿐만 아니라 저희가 사례도 함께 알아볼 예정이니까요. 관심 있으신 분들은 각각 5층 백두홀 그리고 3층 한라홀에서 함께 해주시면 되겠습니다.